my husband was the signal officer with the Admiral, and there was also a large ship. There was a cruiser, and they would go up the east coast for 2 months. They would go up the west coast for 2 months. And when he was up in the east coast, up at Durban, he met the naval party on board the ship. Was one of the most pleasing social invitations to those who lived in Durban. Durban was a very mixed town, and Colin met a girl there, Jane Brown, who was a naval widow who'd gone out and married a South African, and her husband had been sunk, I think, right at the first year of the war, so that we then had a holiday home. And my husband, being of a direct thing, when she said, "Do come up and stay," he said, "Yes, well, I have leave when I get back. Can we come then?" So we then had 2 holidays, I think, going up to stay with them up there, and were able to visit one of there was a slough, I can't spell this, park where the black rhinos lived. And we went up. Craig was working, so he couldn't come. So Jane, I went up, and you went up and you lived in one of these little rondavels. So we had 2, one for Colin and I, one for the food, because you had to take your own food, and Jane. And I think her husband was a very keen polo player. And I think there were Argentinian polo players, or from foreign parts there. And so one day they were very pleased to see Jane, and Colin came out. He'd been getting something from the stores, and stood on the doorstep, as it were, chatting amicably before he came back to mine. And so that the people's tongues were thinking that Jane was having what one calls the dirty weekend. But she wasn't. But it was very interesting to see Africa, and when you see these, there's been quite a lot of films coming out of there, hasn't there? Real people, not stories, and you realise what an enormous country it is. And driving for miles on straight roads, and it's almost impossible, if you're doing the driving, to manage to turn up to a bend when the odd bend comes.